Welcome back. Social ills are leading to desperation demonstrations and murder in Diepsloot township north of Johannesburg. Let's get behind the current headlines to look at what has been going wrong for years. One of the issues raised by the police minister himself is spatial planning. Police find it difficult to enter and exit townships like Diepsloot, which makes it easier, of course, for the criminals to escape. Another official says many RDP houses are being rented out to criminals. Well, Diepsloot is just one example of what is happening across Gauteng. This time last year, the Department of Human Settlements confirmed that more than 1.2 million residents were waiting for RDP homes in the province. The South African Constitution says that housing, sanitation and basic resources are human rights. But by 2014, in this country, nearly a quarter of the urban population was living in informal settlements or shacks. Land invaders are taking advantage of homelessness and selling off plots fraudulently, and buyers lose everything later when the red ants arrive. Government says migration and urbanisation are making the situation all the worse. Well, let's discuss. We're now joined by Dr. Marie Huchzermeyer, who is from the Wits School of Architecture and Planning. We are also joined by Nomfundo Faith Dlamini, who is from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Thank you both for being with me tonight. Let me start with you, Dr. Huchzermeyer. Diepsloot is one of the most densely populated townships in South Africa. Years ago, government was promising either to provide homes in sustainable areas or to take these very informal areas and formalize them with things like street signs, with lighting, with services. Where do all these plans fit in? Where does Diepsloot fit in with all these plans?
Yes, so I can't speak specifically for Diepsloot, but I know that the Treasury is very concerned about getting informal settlement upgrading implemented by municipalities. What has generally happened is that municipalities have used the funding they've received for this to do temporary interventions, more chemical toilets, temporary services, rather than trying to get these settlements onto a permanent track. Now, Diepsloot is particular in that it's not an informal settlement as such, but it has many layers of informality. A large portion of it is a former transit camp, so-called temporary relocation area. People were moved there with a promise to be moved on, but have been living there now for 15 years or more. And the service levels just were never planned for the sort of permanency and haven't been upgraded to that point. But it is something that the government certainly has the programs to do. But it seems there are many things stacked against implementation of that rolling out in any efficient way. We're seeing that across the municipality, or across Gauteng, in fact.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. Just a quick brief to our viewers. You can see there visuals of Esther Mahlangu, the artist who was attacked, is coming out of her home now. She's been visited by officials this afternoon with the welcome news that 2 suspects have been arrested after her attack and robbery. A gun was even taken off her. Apparently that has been retrieved. She is there with the Premier. So that's a story we are following tonight, waving, beaming. Of course, she's considered one of South Africa's national treasures. Ndebele art is her speciality, and many questions around how this was able to happen in the first place. But there you have it, Esther Mahlangu. We go back to talking about the ills of Diepsloot. Staying with you, Doctor, you spoke about temporary situations or temporary interventions. Does that make it all the worse because government comes in and does some things, so you legitimize an area, and we always see the politicians move in and there's a councillor, so it's legitimized, but they're not fully formalized. So you have this lack of sanitation, a lack of water, people talking about their kids being affected by the sewage on the streets. So are those temporary interventions part of the problem?
I would say my analysis, it would be, yes. They're part of the problem in many areas that are kept temporary really for 20 years even. And it's actually quite expensive for the municipality to service on a temporary basis, whether it's chemical toilets or whether it's the desludging of pit latrines, or whether it's water tanks that need to be filled up. All of that, the maintenance of that is far more expensive than once the services have been provided permanently. And it seems a huge amount of frustration also is linked to this. The one service that seems to be provided on a more permanent basis is electrification, although it's provided under a program that is for unproclaimed areas, and often by the human settlements departments or housing departments, it's considered temporary. But electrification, once is there to stay, and communities respond in many settlements, also building in brick. I see the area we're seeing here does not have electrification, it seems, but large parts of Diepsloot are electrified. And that's also where electrification can send a different message than other human settlement interventions. People often kind of respond by just making a settlement permanent, by staying there permanently and building in brick. There we have some brick structures ahead of us on the images, but I mean, that is only one level of services. Police stations, libraries, schools, ECD centers, clinics, all of that needs to form part of a fabric, that, especially one that is this dense. And even more so, as a settlement gets made permanent, it ought to also be reshaped somewhat in a way that better allows for this level of density and for people to sort of live at this level of density.
Yes.
It's not as if there aren't many areas across the globe that have this density and much, much higher density, but it's arranged differently in space and to accommodate that many people in a vibrant way that also is conducive to a decent life.
All right, Ms. Dlamini, let me bring you in here. It must be hard to plan where you have a lot of people coming in and government talking about migration and urbanisation. We know that Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, these are areas that people are attracted to. Is that an excuse for the kind of lack of services, the kind of congestion that we're seeing?
Thank you very much. I think what we actually need to firstly start our conversation on is the mere credential of the fact that South Africa is still operating under a near-apartheid spatial form. We have not changed how it is that the country has been constituted ever since apartheid spatial planning was put into place. And this is why we have the systemic challenge of trying to treat the symptoms of what our areas of urbanization are facing, instead of actually going down to the root causes. And in this regard, we have elements such as spatial development frameworks, we have municipal integrated development plans that all look at how it is that they envision an area, they will plan to set particular objectives and goals, draw in industry, draw in investment. But up until we reconstitute how it is that our country, our cities, our land form and land use is being utilized, we will still have this pertinent excuse of having urbanization and migration as an issue. If you remember also, apartheid was built on the economic foregrounding of migrancy. So migrant labor, and hence our townships are also placed on the outskirts of areas of central business districts. We've done nothing to address that. We've done nothing to change the spatial form in that regard. And hence people are still commuting out from areas of township and informal dwellings to find economic opportunity and to find places in which to draw their livelihoods. And informality in and of itself is an element upon which people have taken agency to address this apartheid spatial form and say, we also want to be closer to places of economic dwelling. We also want to be able to access the type of livelihoods that others have, and whether that pertains to electrification, whether that pertains to job creation. And unfortunately, the pace upon which that this is being done is very slow, but at the same time, there seems to be no element of urgency. And hence, I feel that up until we do a rehaul in terms of how it is the country has been constituted and the types of spatial planning regulations that are in place, all the way from national and particularly at a local government level, we will still have the consistency, if not an overtake in terms of this element of urbanization.
Ms. Dlamini, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but there have been ideas, and government has recognized what you're talking about. I mean, one of the ideas was mixed developments. So you had rich and poor living together. You had large spaces and then building up with smaller spaces on top. But are you saying those ideas have been flawed, or have we just not seen this being rolled out on a huge scale that we need it to be?
So those ideals are there. Those ideals have also been tried to be perpetuated in communities like Sandton. I think the city of Johannesburg was the first city that also recognized an integrated form in terms of how it is that we do development in this regard. There were elements also pertaining to how it is that we can reinvigorate this central business district of the city of Johannesburg. However, what you still find is that the bylaws that are in place and also the type of developmental schemes that are put in place are not necessarily foregrounding the fact that they would like individuals of lesser economic gratuity to be living in the same type of area or complex. And that in itself also poses quite an area, because often at times individuals will be economically excluded. And our economic exclusion is also very racialized. And up until we can get into a point upon which we are not making this an element of choice, but we're ensuring that integration is done, because it's all fine and dandy to have the person who works in your garden or the person who looks after your kids to commute for long distances to come into your home and then again commute and leave. But you feel uncomfortable with that individual living within the same area. And that fundamentally for me seems to be the areas upon which that we need to not be very candid, but how it is that we ensure that there's an element of feasible transformation within our society.
All right, Doctor, you take the final word, and please be quick. I mean, Ms. Dlamini is talking about an integrated approach, but to what extent has housing policy changed over the years? All the claims that RDP housing, it's not transparent, nobody knows where they're on the list. Sometimes political reasons behind that have been claimed and asserted. Then there was an idea to give land, not houses. Just tell us where we are.
I think the reality is that RDP houses are not the answer for the future anymore. And a lot of households have realized that and are, in fact, just holding on to pieces of land that they managed to get a foothold on and are building a lot of houses. It's actually a phenomenon at the moment that people are building very innovative little double-story units in many different places, just on the little land they can hold on to. That in itself leads to small measures of integration in that the planned developments are still by and large on the periphery and highly segregated, and people sort of vote with their feet in terms of where they place themselves. But that's not to say that I entirely agree with Ms. Dlamini's recommendations around the need for far stronger transformation, especially in the suburban areas as well. We've also been trying to make that point from Wits about urban land reform that is needed, that also needs to bring people much closer to where they are working, and for the suburbs not to respond in such a negative way when that is proposed, such a need for affordable housing. And affordable housing is unfortunately not what's incorporated in these integrated housing, because the market is so exclusionary and so segregated. One already calls inclusionary housing when there's sort of measures of bringing it together. But actually for someone who lives in Diepsloot, lives in a shack in Diepsloot, to be able to afford to live in those units is a far cry still. Yeah. So one still has to conceptually think very differently about how to make it happen.
All right, I wish we could solve this, but of course it's part of the The problems leading to these social ills that we're seeing exploding, in a sense, in Diepsloot. Thank you both for your time. Hope to chat to you in future. That was Dr. Marie Huchzermeyer, who is from the Wits School of Architecture and Planning, and Nomfundo Faith Dlamini, who is from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London.